All right, well, we might make a start. Thanks to those of you who've come along today. My name's Paul. I'm here from Powershop. And as you would know, today's small business event is all about some tips on how to green your business and obviously help you save some money while you're doing that as well. So to start off with just a couple of housekeeping things, you will notice we're filming today's event. The reason we're doing that is we're actually going to webcast out the content again later in the event to some people maybe in regional areas or who couldn't make it along today. So you will notice the camera. If you do ask some questions a little bit later on, I'll probably repeat them for the panel. That way we know we've got the audio for the recording as well. Tea and coffee is available in the room next door, as is some morning tea. The toilets are down on the ground floor if you do need to go, and the password's 2016. And in terms of safety, the muster area is just over where Lauren's seated, over in the corner. And if we can just all meet there, and then we'll direct you down the stairs. We have a representative here from Small Business Victoria who can help us, and then the muster area is around the back of the building. So moving into today, so Powershop are sponsoring the Small Business Festival for the first time this year. It's a really exciting opportunity for us because as an electricity retailer operating in Victoria and also New South Wales, we really want to be able to help small business owners obviously save money off their electricity because we know it can be a big expense. But we also know that actually in terms of understanding how electricity works and how you're using electricity within your business, there's not a lot of information unfortunately out there. And we'd like to provide some of that information back to our customers through some of our usage tools. Now we thought rather than this being purely Powershop talking to you all today, we'd actually call on a couple of, connections that we've got and industry experts to really share their experience working with small business. So I'd like to just start by introducing our panellists today. So firstly, sitting in the middle, we've got Jon Dee. Jon's the anchor host of Sky News Smart Money. Jon's been supporting small business now for over 20 years, helping small businesses reduce their energy costs and particularly make them more efficient and more sustainable. Jon, some of his other works, including founded Planet Ark and National Tree Day. And since 1992, he's had a meaningful impact on the lives of tens of thousands of small business owners. You'll see Jon's got a book in his hand, which we'll talk about a bit later. That's called Energy Cut. And that provides advice for small business owners on how they can reduce their electricity bills. Jon, as I mentioned, is the anchor of Smart Money. That's a primetime TV program on the Sky News Money and Sky Business channels. It airs live at 6:30 p.m. every Wednesday, and it's also repeated at 9:30 p.m. It's actually the only TV program at the moment in Australia that's focused on business and sustainability. In addition to hosting the show, Jon's also the writer and executive producer of the program. And ultimately what Smart Money does is show businesses how to save money by being smarter with energy and other resources. Next, I'd like to welcome Charlie Knaggs. Welcome, Charlie. So Charlie's the Principal of Energy and Climate Change at Point Advisory. He's got over 12 years' experience in the sustainability sector, with particular expertise in carbon management, energy efficiency, energy intelligence, and environmental management. Charlie's also got extensive experience working across the mining, retail, energy waste, and professional services sectors. At Point Advisory, Charlie and his team there work with their clients to manage their energy use and to identify and unlock energy management and mitigation opportunities. Their energy services include energy audits, energy strategies, renewable energy system modelling, measurement, and also verification and identification, and finally implementation of some of these strategies to help you save money within your business. And finally, I'd like to welcome Will from our business sales team at Powershop, aka Fridge. You may hear me refer to him by that at times. Will's filling the role certainly today of being the Powershop representative. He's had now over 2 years' experience working with Powershop, and in that time he's played a really critical role in shaping our business strategy. I know that Will prides himself on his industry knowledge, his exceptional customer service and his ability to tailor solutions for his customers. So thank you and welcome to all the panel members today. So what I might do now is just pass over to each of the panellists to give a little bit more of an introduction, a bit more colour about some of their tips and tricks for businesses. So Jon, might start with you.
Well, I guess the one thing I always like to kind of give people tips on is what are the kind of the top 5 things you can do to save money. So can you hear me okay, by the way? Over there, good. But the first key thing, before I give you the energy efficiency advice, I think one of the key things to do is to get a better energy deal. So with the latest book I've got, which I'll give you a download link, you can get a free copy of this online. And it basically shows you how to save money. But the first thing I always say to business owners is, you know, have you actually called your energy company to see if you can get a better deal? And I've done about 50 speeches around Australia for this book. What was most interesting about it was that when I say to people, hands up, who's actually got a better energy deal, who called up the energy provider, hardly anyone ever puts their hands up with small businesses. And the ones who have put their hand up haven't then called back 2 years later when they don't realise that that deal has actually run out and they've gone back up to the most expensive rate. So I would strongly advise you to call up energy providers and get comparison quotes, because that is an instant way to save 10% or more on energy bills. It's amazing how much money you can save if you haven't called up your energy company. Often you're on the default highest rate, and it's amazing how much extra money that's costing you. So the other key thing, which I guess would be really worth looking at, is how do you become more efficient? So when I was doing research for the book, I looked at how much money could we save. And so I went literally to hundreds of businesses to look at how efficient they were, what more could they do to save money. And some research was done that showed for every 1% improvement we had in energy efficiency, we would save $1.5 billion a year in our economy. What's been exciting for me doing the Smart Money TV show on Sky News and writing the book was seeing so many businesses that are getting 30, 50, 60, 70, 80% reductions in energy use by being a lot more efficient with the equipment they're getting, by going and getting renewable energy, getting solar on the roof, getting heat pumps in some cases with bigger businesses getting wind turbines in. But in terms of what are the top 5 things that small businesses can do is switching off stuff. So about 10% of energy bills at the small business level is stuff being left on. If you've got things like compressed air, if you've got equipment that uses a lot of energy and you leave that on, it can be higher than 10%, especially if it's like compressed air and you've got leaks. The amount of money that's costing is phenomenal. Old refrigeration equipment being left on is a ridiculous waste of money. For example, if you've got a cafe, if you've got a drinks fridge, you can actually have a little $15 timer that turns that off as soon as your shop shuts. And because of the insulation properties of the fridge, you can leave that turned off for 8 hours and then have it turn on again a couple of hours before your cafe restarts. So I know some cafes that actually turn off their drinks fridge for 12 hours a day. And that just literally halves the bill on refrigeration. So that's a good way to go. Thermostats. It's amazing how often, I'm sure you've all experienced this, you go into a place and you think, wow, it's hot in here, or it's too cold in here. And every degree, say for example in winter, every degree above 20 that you increase your heating is a 10% increase in your heating costs. And so often for programs like Sunrise and Today, I've gone in with a camera crew because someone writes in and says, oh, my bill is ridiculous, I'm getting ripped off. And you go in there and it's the depths of winter, and it's usually a bloke who does this. It's like there's the bloke's there, he's in shorts and a t-shirt, it's winter, and he's turned the thermostat up to 26. For some reason, blokes like 26 on the thermostat. And so that's like 60% more energy, more cost, than if you just bothered to put a jumper on and a pair of jeans. And so it's often, so thermostats, a lot of staff around the country mess with thermostats. And so what was interesting is, I won't name them, but there's a very famous fast food chain that actually had electricians install a lot of fake thermostats. So all these kids are going up there going, and not realising this thing actually did nothing. It clicked, but wasn't connected to anything. So fake thermostats are really efficient. If you've got a problem with your staff, just put a fake thermostat on the wall and just, point here. So that works. Perception of control, totally fake. But what was interesting is it saves a lot of money. Or you can get a thermostat cover. So that's all in the book. I've got information on how you can do that. Lighting is a no-brainer. It's what's been exciting in Victoria is how easy it is to go out and get LED lighting. But it's really important to get good quality LED lighting. If you haven't heard of the name of the brand, there's a link in the book that shows you there's a website where you can type in the brand name. If it's not on that website, don't get it, because it usually means it's not going to last. If you look at someone like McDonald's, every time you go past the Golden Arches now, it's not just the energy that they're saving. So, people often focus on lighting and think about the energy that's being saved, but it's the maintenance costs are huge savings as well. So if you look at the Golden Arches with McDonald's, that's now all LED all around the country. Now, that lighting will last significantly longer. it will use a massive amount less electricity, sometimes 50% less or more. But the biggest saving for McDonald's is they don't have to keep sending a tradie up and down to change the lights. And that's where the really big saving comes in. People often don't cost in that whole factor of maintenance reduction. And that's huge when it comes to equipment being properly maintained, lighting changing. It's amazing how much money can be saved on maintenance. But lighting, a lot of reception areas have halogen downlights. They're incredibly hot, so they add to your air conditioning bill. They're ridiculously expensive to run. And if you replace those, the halogen downlights with the LED downlights, you're looking at energy reductions of 70 to 80%. Plus, they'll last 25 to 50 times longer. So again, the maintenance savings are huge. Equipment is a no-brainer. It's amazing how many people buy equipment without looking at what the running costs are. So one of the biggest savings you can do is when you're getting equipment, don't just look at the running cost of the equipment. If it's basic stuff like fridges and washing machines, you can get the energy rating stars on there. If it's equipment that doesn't have that, look at whether it's listed on the Energy Star website, but get the actual running costs. And then think, if you're going to have that equipment for 5 or 10 years, look at the purchase price, then look at the 5 to 10 year running costs. When you add those up, you get the real costs. And often the more expensive equipment that's more energy efficient can save you a ridiculous amount of money. So that's a no-brainer to do. And the final one is really looking at solar. So not just solar for electricity, but solar for hot water. So I was, anyone who watched my show on Wednesday night, I was out at De Bortley Winery. Very tough gig, that one, very tough. He kept insisting I try the wine as we go around. I think he was hoping for a favourable report, which was easy, because it was actually probably the most energy efficient winery in the country. So I was always going to do a nice story anyway, but good wine too, so De Bortley. And what was interesting was he had the solar thermal for hot water. So every single day, they're getting 20,000 litres of hot water just using solar thermal. So that's an amazing amount. So you can actually scale up solar hot water now to as much as you want. So 90% of their hot water is now coming from solar powered. Then you've got solar PV. Now the solar PV is where you get the solar electricity from. And the savings I'm seeing in so many businesses where the price of solar has plunged, as you know, dramatically. The payback usually about 5 years for a lot of systems. Some systems are even cheaper. Some, can be more expensive depending on what setup you get. But 5 to 7 years is usually a maximum kind of return that you would get. Those solar systems are going to last for up to 25 years. So the savings I'm seeing around the country, and again, it's in the book, are phenomenal, because the key thing is to take control of your bills. Get the right provider and find the ways to just take control of it. And the solar batteries that are now coming out in my home, I've got solar batteries, and I've had them now for a year, before Tesla came out with their batteries. And I've massively reduced my electricity bill, because in the daytime, the solar that we don't use in our home offices goes into the batteries. And then when it comes to that time of day when it's really expensive for electricity, we flip all the offices, all the home, totally onto batteries. And it stays that way till about 10 o'clock at night. And then at midnight, it kicks in with cheaper electricity. We top up the battery a bit. So when the more expensive electricity comes again in the morning, we're back on batteries until the sun shines, and then we're back onto solar power. So there are ways you can really take control of your power bill and really boost your bottom line. And that's what the whole book is about. So if you want to go to energycut.com.au, so energycut.com.au, that's where you can download the book free of charge. It was funded by the Department of Industry. Took 3 years to do, but it's got everything in there that your business can do to save money.
Thank you, John. Charlie, I might go to you next. I think some of the things that John's mentioned, there can be a bit of a perception that some of these upgrades can involve a really significant upfront expense, and that can create a barrier for small businesses. So I'd love it if you could tell the audience here today different ways they could look at low-cost ways of driving energy efficiency, and particularly through analytics and tuning.
Yeah, sure thing, Paul. So one of the areas that we're focusing on at the moment is the use of what we're calling energy intelligence to drive energy efficiency outcomes. So we're talking about the collection of data and the analysis of data. And don't get scared off by that. I'm not talking about particularly complex data sets. And in fact, one of the great things about living in Victoria, there's many great things about living in Victoria, but one of the great things is that we have smart meters. So every home and every business in Victoria has what's called a smart meter, which is an electricity meter that is constantly beaming back your energy consumption to your energy retailer. And you can perform some really basic, so you can access that data, you can request that data, do some really basic analysis on it, and identify opportunities for energy efficiency. And the sorts of things I'm talking about there are if you simply plot your energy consumption as a line chart over the course of a day or a week or a month, you can start to identify anomalies in your energy consumption. That might be, you might notice that equipment or lighting's being left on overnight. You might do a comparison between two similar facilities. If you've got two stores, they're both kind of the same size, one of them's consuming twice as much electricity, then you can be pretty sure that something's wrong with that second facility. Something's being left on. We're not talking about high cost measures here, we're just talking about switching stuff off, retiming things, reducing temperature set points as John suggested. And I'll give you an example from a customer that we had, a client of ours who was an aged care facility, and they came to us, they'd noticed that one of their aged care homes was consuming quite a lot more electricity, or was costing a lot more in electricity than their other facilities, and they called us in to do an energy audit, which is where we go through the facility and we try to identify opportunities. And the first thing we always do when we're doing an energy audit is to collect the data and to do some basic analysis of the data. And at this particular aged care facility, the first thing we noticed was that at midnight, every night, on the hour, there was this spike in electricity demand. It was actually tripling. Electricity demand at this facility was tripling. And that's not normal. There's no reason that we could think of. We did consider that perhaps the residents were having a party at midnight every night and cranking on the stereo, but we were quickly able to discount that possibility. And so we investigated a bit further, and we found that it was actually a metering issue. So the distribution networks who own the meters, there was a faulty issue with the meter. We notified the distribution company, and it saved that facility $30,000 a year in energy consumption, which was a big chunk. It was about 30% of their energy use. Didn't cost anything, just cost a phone call to the distribution company. And what's more, this issue had been going on for 5 or 6 years, so these guys were able to get a refund of a couple of $100,000. Now, we would never have seen that, no one would have known about it if we hadn't simply looked at the electricity demand. You look at a line curve, you don't need to be an expert to see, if there's a big spike at midnight every night, that there's an issue there. So there's some really simple things you can do that don't cost a lot of money to help get a better handle on your energy consumption. And the other great use of data is as was mentioned earlier, energy procurement, getting onto new energy tariffs. It's really important to have a handle on your consumption profiles before you can get on the most optimal tariff for your situation. So I'd suggest that everyone go away, and if you contact your energy retailer and ask them for interval data, it's called electricity interval data, they'll send you a little spreadsheet and have a little play around and see what you can find.
Thanks, Charlie. Fridge. So obviously you're on the phone talking to business customers every day. What are a couple of the main challenges they identify to you, and what advice do you give them in terms of how they can overcome them?
So I think one of the advantages I've got is previous to Powershop, I'd been in hospitality for about 10 years. So I come from an industry that was very much based on the customer service side of things, and electricity wasn't like that when I kind of came to it. So I had a very steep learning curve of the industry when I started, and dealing with customers, probably the number one thing is the understanding of the industry and the costs, and I guess where those costs come from. So particularly with businesses where there's different, what we call network tariffs, and that kind of distinguishes what you get charged for your electricity. Most people are used to their home electricity, they get a bill and it might just have a peak and off-peak charge. Suddenly they get a commercial bill and there's 12 different costs. And whilst they're the exact same cost for your residential account, they're displayed differently. So understanding exactly what those costs are and what you end up paying per kilowatt hour of electricity is something that most businesses just don't understand. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is they might say at the top a rate of 5.5 cents for peak electricity. And they say, oh, I've seen this rate of 20 cents and I'm getting charged 5.5 cents here. This deal's amazing. But what they don't understand is that once you add in the network costs and other certificate costs and government charges, that the costs can be very similar and in some cases even more. So I guess one of my biggest roles is actually debugging the industry for my customers and understanding what they're paying and whether or not they can pay less for the exact same product. And I guess one of the other things is probably the hardest thing to explain and understand within our industry is how green power works, and I guess trying to back a company that's environmentally friendly, but there's so much marketing out there about what these guys are doing that it makes it very hard to understand who's actually doing the right thing and the impact that you have when you buy green power. So certainly a lot of people think when they buy green power, suddenly their electricity is actually from a renewable source, whereas realistically the electricity never changes from retailer to retailer. As these guys have mentioned, it's about the network companies and distributors. But what you can do is you can start to increase the demand for renewable energy, and you can also start to offset kind of the emissions associated with your business. So I guess one of the biggest things I deal with is just debugging all the myths that are out there and trying to help my customers understand exactly where their costs are coming from and how we can decrease the costs on one side, but also decrease the environmental impact on the other.
Thanks, Will. John, I might go to you next. So I think a lot of the energy efficiency tips we've talked about are certainly about reducing an energy bill. It's a great outcome for a small business, but there are also some benefits to being more sustainable. Why is it you think being sustainable is really good for the environment, but also for someone's business?
Well, one of the things I think is really important is we're seeing in the supply chain a lot of pressures. So if you think now about, if you think about every time there's a major flood somewhere where you might be getting raw ingredients from, raw materials from, your price can go dramatically up in your supply chain. So one of the key things to do for the resilience of a business is to look at your supply chain. How sustainable is it? How safe is it? If you also look at where we're at now, we've got 7 billion people on the planet, and nearly 1 billion of those we can't feed properly already. By 2050, we know we're going to have about at least 9 billion people. There's going to be another 2 billion people. Now, the planet isn't changing size, and so the issue we've got to face as businesses and as societies is how the heck are we going to clothe, feed, run economies with 2 billion extra people? And that's going to be one of the key things. Because what's going to happen to businesses is we're going to be competing for the same amount of resources, but there's going to be a lot more of us. So one of the key things that we need to do as businesses and as society is to learn to do more with less. And that's what smart money is all about in Sky News. It's about, okay, well, how can businesses become a lot more efficient with the use of materials that they're using in their business, become a lot more efficient in how they use their energy, switch to more sustainable ways of doing things that really reduce impact. So, for example, like going to solar is a real no-brainer because you save money and you massively reduce the amount of pollutant emissions associated with coal-fired power stations or gas-fired power stations. So it's really, really important to think about a company that looks at making their supply chain and their business more sustainable, also doesn't just save money, they make their business more resilient. And that's one of the key things to look at. Every time you see a major flood or a disaster happen and it affects a business's supply chain, that company is suddenly wobbly through no fault of their own. It's one of the key things about a good, sustainable business that looks at its supply chain, looks at the whole setup and operation. It makes your business more resilient against natural disasters, against changes that come in the economy, and it's a really critical thing to do. And so businesses that are well prepared are the ones that will be able to sustain themselves through those kind of problems.
Thank you. Charlie, another one for you. And I must admit, it'd be a really good learning for me too. I've been in the industry now for just over a year. I hear a lot about different government assistance programs that might be out there specific to energy efficiency. Could you maybe give the audience an overview of some of the key opportunities and what they may be able to access through some of these programs?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that there are barriers to energy efficiency, and they're very well documented. And there are particularly barriers for small businesses in achieving energy efficient outcomes, and we know that they're around your time. You don't have a lot of time to spend on these things. You may not have the technical knowledge to be able to understand what's going on and to be able to identify opportunities. You may not have access to the capital that you need to implement solutions. But there are also a lot of opportunities in this space. I'll give you a really crude example of how we see this working. So think about a small business, $1 million revenue. They're on a 10% profit margin, so they're making $100,000 profit a year. So that business wants to double its profit. Double its profit. So it wants to get to $200,000 in profit. So other things being equal, they've kind of got two choices. They can either double their revenue from 1 million to 2 million and maintain the 10% profit margin, or they can cut their costs by 10%. Now, for a lot of businesses, it's going to be easier, or some combination of the two, but for a lot of businesses, it's going to be easier to cut costs by 10%, by $100,000, and energy efficiency is a great way of cutting costs. So that just kind of emphasises that when you invest in energy efficiency, when you achieve savings, it goes straight to your bottom line. Now, governments know that these barriers exist, and so they've developed a lot of programs over time to help companies to achieve energy efficient outcomes. The big one here in Victoria is called the VEET scheme, the Victorian Energy Efficiency Target, and there's the ESS scheme in New South Wales. If you've ever had someone come and knock on your door and try to give you a shower head or an LED light bulb or a standby power controller for free, the reason they were able to do that is because of the VEET scheme, because energy retailers are essentially required to subsidise energy efficiency improvements in the economy. Now, the VEET scheme used to be a residential scheme, but it's now also available to commercial businesses. And as John alluded to earlier, you can actually, there are now suppliers who will come in and refit all of your lighting in your facility, change you all over to LEDs for zero cost because the certificate prices are so high. Now, I would also caution against that. Don't go out necessarily and find the guy who'll do it for the cheapest, because there is a massive quality gap between a poor LED and a good LED, and we absolutely endorse John's approach to find the good ones, but that just gives you a sense of the scale of subsidy and assistance that's available to you in the area of lighting, but you can also, there's a variety of other technologies that are covered by the scheme as well. So avail yourself of the VEET scheme. There are also agencies, government agencies. So here in Victoria, we have Sustainability Victoria, who run the Smarter Resources, Smarter Business program, and that subsidises energy audits. So you can actually get a 50-50 funded energy audit, someone to come through your site and identify opportunities for you. They also give implementation bonuses, I think up to about $10,000 or $15,000 to assist you to actually implement the findings of those energy audits. I should just also qualify by saying the round of that scheme actually expired last week, but we're expecting a new round before the end of the year, so keep your eyes peeled for the Sustainability Victoria website. If you have facilities in New South Wales, there's a similar scheme run by the Office of Environment and Heritage. And energy productivity and energy efficiency are high on government agendas at the moment, so we're expecting more and more of these programs to get announced over time. So just be aware that there are a lot of programs out there. There is a lot of assistance aimed at the small business market, and make sure you take advantage of it.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing on that? It was really important, the point you raised there about the quality, again, on lighting. Same applies for solar. So if people come to you offering you solar deals, really don't judge that on price, because there are different, as you can see in the book, there are different quality panels. So there's tier 1 panels, there's tier 2 panels, there's tier 3 panels. If someone comes offering you a tier 3 very, very cheap panel, there is a very big difference in quality between tier 3 and tier 1. So really important that if you want to look at solar, make sure it's a tier 1 panel. Okay, that's really, really important to do that, because before I wrote the book, I wasn't even aware of that kind of difference. So luckily, the person who installed my solar panels, the first ones, I didn't know about that. Luckily, they were tier 1. But it could have been anything. So very important to know that you're getting a quality product.
So Will, a bit of a question without notice for you. So we've heard a lot of advice from John and Charlie around the use of data and how that can support good decisions, and we've also heard about the importance of looking around for a retailer. Without necessarily going solely into Powershop and the offer, what are a few things that not only Powershop can offer, but other retailers out there can offer that people should be looking for when they're actually making that choice of who they should, or who should retail their electricity?
Well, I think one of the things that we've obviously established is that the quality of the electricity, regardless of the retailer, is the same. So you don't have to switch to a cheaper provider and think the power's going to turn off all of a sudden. So the quality is the exact same, and like we've already discussed, the running costs of the electricity, you can pay 20% more for the exact same product because you haven't shopped around retailers. So certainly in Victoria, the 1st of January every year, network costs change, retailers will then update their rates. So it's kind of a good checkpoint to say, all right, what's my current deal? Can I get a better deal? Certainly going to government websites like Your Choice in Victoria are always good, because all retailers load in their offers. And it's probably best to, if you go to a third party and they say, all right, in your area, this is the cheapest retailer, to then contact the retailer directly. You're going to find out more about the retailer, how they operate, and potentially hook up with an account manager. So certainly one of the things that we offer is account management for all our business customers. And I think the peace of mind to be able to call up myself instead of a call centre, know exactly who you're dealing with, if there is any issues, and can say, all right, looks like there's an outage in your area, or there's a reason behind it. If there's a billing issue and you're worried about the bills coming out, you can call someone directly that you kind of have that relationship with. So I think certainly within the industry, I'd be always looking at price and benchmarking it. But the second would be, what kind of service am I going to get? Because we all know time is money when you're running a small business, and spending 4 hours on a phone to speak to a call centre to then be passed on to someone else isn't an efficient way to do things. But if you can email someone and know you're going to get a response, or call them directly, the money you'll save in that alone, I think is definitely worth looking for service on par with the price.
Thank you. So we've had a chance to hear from our panel members. Thought it might be a good chance to throw over to the audience. Is there anything people would like to ask out there? Yeah, gentleman at the back.
G'day, how's it going? Thanks for a great presentation. I thought I'd ask a question of the fridge. Can I call you fridge? Yeah, go for it. Just with the Powershop, I'm a Powershop customer.
Yep.
I love the offering. I'd like to be able to afford to buy the green energy a little bit cheaper. Can you see there's still a fair difference between the green energy offerings through Powershop and the regular rate? Will we see that dropping anytime soon, or is that going to become more affordable? Is that a government thing, or something?
So just to repeat the question was just around the differences between a standard power offering and then green power or certified green power. So I think Will alluded to it earlier, just in terms of may we see that price change over time.
Yeah, so what actually dictates the price of green power is the retailer you're with has to go and purchase large-scale renewable energy certificates, which can be sold for commercial value. And when the rep looked a little bit shaky, these certificates were worth, I think, about $30. So you're buying green power for an extra 3 to 4 cents. And then once we kind of had a bit more stability around the rep, the prices have gone up over the last 6 to 12 months. So they're currently at about $85, I think market value up to $90. And that's why green power's gone up. So as a retailer, we're backed by Meridian Energy, who own 2 wind farms here in Australia. They generate renewable energy, which then generates certificates, and we can sell these certificates for that price. So it makes our wind farm commercially a lot more viable, but it also means going forward, the ability to build wind farms and other renewable assets a lot more viable, because you make money from your certificates and also from selling the energy. So although it's making it a little bit harder to kind of purchase them yourself, the reason is because the demand has now increased, and all retailers have to purchase a certain amount to cover their consumption of their customers. So there's not really a more affordable way to do it, because it's completely dictated supply and demand in the market. I think the market caps out at, is it $93? $93 is the highest it can possibly go. And depending on how many certificates retailers have purchased will change what they can offer. But certainly I think for about 6 months there, we kept our rate and we're just losing money because it just kept going up and up and up. And so it's an amazing thing to do if you want to support renewable energy and continue to increase the demand. What I would say is don't get locked into a set percentage of green power, and when it makes sense for your business to purchase it, then purchase as much or as little as you can. As a business, if you purchase 10% of your overall consumption annually, you've got the ability to at least use the green power logo for your business and say you're accredited with it. And then I guess with our standard offer, because of things like that, we offset the electricity to make it carbon neutral under the NCOS accreditation. And that's for customers that don't want to jump straight into green power, but also want to think or know that they're doing something better for the environment than just purchasing standard electricity.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, please.
Okay, question for all now. What's happening at the moment in the marketplace to try and put a cap or even in some cases reduce network costs? Because network charges are making up seem to be an increasing proportion of the energy bill. So I just sort of throw that out to.
So just to repeat the question, was about the rising price of network costs and what is actually being done to at least try and cap or maybe even reduce these costs. Charlie?
So yeah, we definitely saw an increase, a very steep increase in electricity costs between sort of 2008 and probably about 2013, 14. A lot of that was attributed incorrectly to the carbon price. The majority of that cost increase was because of overinvestment in poles and wires. what we've actually seen since then is electricity prices have levelled off quite a lot, and there's actually they're predicted to be pretty flat. And when I say electricity prices, I'm talking about your total bill, so a combination of your supply charges and your demand charges. Predicted to be fairly flat out to about 2020. In terms of the actual changes that have created that, there's a few. Energy demand has increased across the grid, which means that there's more. The costs of operating the grid is essentially a fixed cost. So if there's a lower demand for electricity in the grid, then that fixed cost gets shared across fewer customers and across fewer units of energy, if you like. So when demand increases, they can share the costs across more customers and more kilowatt hours, which means that prices come down. But there's also work being done in the background to ensure that we don't overinvest. So, do we really need gold-plated networks, or can we live with? So there's this amazing statistic that's like I'm completely misquoting it here, but it's along the lines of, so you've got to build your grid for the peak events, which means that for most of the time you're only using sort of 60-70% of the grid, but you need to build it so that for that brief hot summer's afternoon when everyone's got their air conditioners on, they can get the power through. So there's this stat, something along the lines of, there's about $10 billion worth of electricity infrastructure that gets used for less than 48 hours a year. $10 billion that just sits there, does nothing except for that 48 hours when it's really needed. Now, of course, you want that there because you want a continuity of supply, but can we kind of reduce our expectations on the grid and avoid those instances of gold plating? We probably can, and there's a couple of changes that have occurred around that as well to try to avoid those instances of gold plating.
Other members of the panel? Will? Thanks. Anyone else in the audience at all? Please.
So we want to for a cash flow and start my own small business. So my question is sort of goes to, I think, currently we start talking about that the service doesn't change no matter which retailer you go for, and then the complexity to the bills always sort of different network charges. So my question is, what's the actual service that's been sold these days? Used to, if you kind of go back in the old days, it was very much just widgets that kind of like kilowatt hours is what we put behind. But what are we buying these days, and maybe what will we be buying in the future? You know what I'm saying?
So I think just to summarise the question was around some of the complexities and the services that are provided. The electricity itself is effectively the same regardless of which retailer you're with, but what are some of the makeup of the bill for a customer at home, but also what can we expect that to move to in the future as well?
So I guess some of the complexities around business tariffs and business billing is there's different fixed components. So there's been a lot of talk about demand charges, and demand charges are more common for businesses, and they're basically around your highest point of consumption. And so the network can kind of basically allow that to happen. They can install a different type of hardware, and that hardware gets paid off by yourself over a period of time. So the billing has to kind of show you what you're paying for. And when it's different, everyone splits it out differently. So it shouldn't change too much from retailer to retailer, but effectively everyone can display their costs however they like. So if you're used to seeing a standard bill that had peak, off-peak and a supply charge, and all of a sudden you're on a business tariff that's got the same cost, but it's also got demand charges, because the demand charges are a network cost, they will then split out your energy costs. So they'll show you peak and off-peak charge, and then they'll show you what the network charge us as the retailer for peak and off-peak, plus your demand charges, and there would probably a third-party metering cost to actually service that meter. And the demand charge is something that are going to become a lot more common, possibly even for residential homes, and it's the network company's way of, I guess, trying to minimise the highest points of demand. So if you've got a very volatile consumption where the usage goes through the roof, you're basically going to pay for that with the network companies, and that's something that, because it's a pass-through charge, has to be split out on the bills to actually show you what your highest point of demand was and what you're paying for it. So I guess the second point would be to actually understand what your highest point of demand is, and as Charlie said earlier, understanding, looking at your usage graph and seeing if there's something early morning, nighttime that is really putting it through the roof, and seeing if there's something you can do through either energy efficiency or greater management of your usage to decrease any fixed costs like that.
One of the key things that companies are looking at is when they are having a peak say in the afternoon when it's most expensive? Can they then shift that production to another point of the day where it's going to be cheaper? And where companies have done that, it's amazing how much money you can actually save. One of the other things to do, though, if you're doing this from home, is really looking at what's the best deal you can get, making sure you are on the best tariff on all fronts, but then really looking at, if you're at home in the daytime, you can use have you got solar power already? It's really worth looking then at solar, because if you're using that electricity in the daytime, for a lot of people, if, say you weren't based at home, but you're going somewhere else and using electricity somewhere else, then it may not make sense to have a big system at home. But if you're at home and you're using that energy, then solar really makes a lot of sense. And if you're going to stay in that place where you're at for some time to come, I've had people say to me, I've been really thinking about having solar now for the last 5 years. When do you reckon it's the right time to do it? And I said, 5 years ago when you first bloody thought about it, because it would have been paid off by now, and you'd be making a lot more money. So there's never a better time than now to get solar, and especially start thinking about batteries. Batteries are at that point still where they still don't make economic sense, but the price is tumbling dramatically. Just as we've seen this massive reduction in cost of solar, we're going to see the same thing. We've got the Tesla Gigafactories just up in the first stage. You've got the Chinese opening up major battery factories, so the whole price of the solar batteries, they can capture that electricity, is coming down. And also, I was in Japan 8 weeks ago, and the way the Japanese are going now is actually having your car can actually capture electricity and run your house. So that's where we're going to see some quite dramatic changes in the way we use electricity, the way we store electricity, so that we get the best balance. And the best balance to get is one where you've got guaranteed supply, but also you're generating your own electricity too. And one of the things in the book gives you a bunch of ideas on how to get the best balance with that.
Thanks, guys. Anything else from the audience at all? Okay, so what I might do just to summarise is, firstly, I'd like to thank our three panel members. So Charlie, John and Will, if we could put our hands together, please. And I'd like to give a bit of a plug. So I think Charlie and Point Advisory, if you'd like to get some more energy efficiency advice or some more advice on government programs and particularly how to actually evaluate the data that you're getting from your smart meter, I think great people to speak to. John's already mentioned a couple of times that his book's available free online, so please take the time to visit John's website and download that. There's some fantastic tips in there. And if you are in the business of shopping around at the moment and trying to find out, am I on a good deal with my electricity either at home or in my business, I'd really recommend you look up Powershop and give us a call and find out what it is that we could potentially do for you. And we're going to give you two answers. You're on a fantastic deal, keep doing what you're doing, and come back to us in the future, potentially around price change, or we think there's a couple of ways we could not only save you money, but also provide some other great tools that can help you run your business more efficiently. So thanks once again to everyone for today, and I wish you all the best for this year with your businesses. Thank you.